Kelsey Tanner stood at the kitchen counter, her laptop open, fingers moving swiftly over the keys. She was in her element, designing a sleek website for a high-end fashion client. The house was quiet, just the way she liked it. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of her spacious home, a gift from her late uncle, who had always seen her potential when others didn't. The sudden intrusion of her parents broke that peace. "Kelsey, are you in here?" Her mother, Diane, called from the entryway. Without waiting for a response, Diane and Kelsey's father, Ron, shuffled into the room, glancing around as if inspecting the house. Diane's critical gaze fell on the high ceilings and immaculate decor, a frown settling on her lips. "Kelsey," Diane said again, this time with a tinge of exasperation, "we need to talk." Kelsey closed her laptop slowly, already sensing the conversation wouldn't be pleasant. "What is it, Mom?" Ron cleared his throat, shuffling his feet. "Your mother and I have been thinking." Diane interrupted. "This house is too big for you. It's such a waste, really, for one person. Why don't we move in? Your father and I need to get out of that old house. It's falling apart and we can't afford the renovations." Kelsey blinked, taken aback by the brazenness of their request. "You want to move in here?" Her mind raced. The thought of her parents living with her, judging her every move, critiquing her choices, was unbearable. It wasn't just about space. It was about freedom, the freedom she'd fought so hard for. Working as a freelance web designer had given her flexibility and independence. She liked her solitude. She needed it to breathe. Diane sighed impatiently, as though Kelsey were being unreasonable. "It's only practical. And besides, at your age, it's not like you're tied down with a husband or kids. What are you going to do with all this space?" Kelsey bit her lip, the words stinging even though she'd heard them before. Her parents had always been critical of her single status. To them, her success as a web designer wasn't enough. It didn't compare to her sister Sandy's conventional life, well, what used to be conventional. "I'm not sure that's a good idea," Kelsey said carefully, trying to mask her growing frustration. "I work from home. I need my space, my privacy." Her father, who had been silent until now, scoffed. "You mean you sit around on your computer all day? How much work could that possibly be?" Kelsey's fists clenched under the table, but she kept her voice calm. "It's a real job, Dad. I make more than enough to support myself." "That's not the point," Diane interjected. "You should think about us for a change. We raised you, didn't we? It's time you gave back. We're your family." The word family hung in the air, weighted and suffocating. Kelsey didn't know what to say. Her parents were pushing her into a corner, and she felt her resolve wavering. What choice did she have? She couldn't throw them out into the streets. And that's how they made it sound, as if they had nowhere else to go, as if her refusal would be the ultimate betrayal. Against her better judgment, she nodded reluctantly. "Okay, fine, but just for a while, until you figure something else out." Diane smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, dear, just for a while." 2 weeks later, the house was no longer the sanctuary Kelsey had cherished. It was a war zone. Her parents had invaded every corner of her life. Her once quiet mornings were now filled with her father's grumbling about the TV and her mother's constant questions about why Kelsey wasn't married yet. "Had you even thought about dating again?" Diane asked one afternoon as Kelsey tried to focus on her work. "You're not getting any younger, you know." Kelsey let out a sigh, her patience wearing thin. "Mom, I'm happy with my life the way it is." Diane pursed her lips. "Happiness is temporary. You'll regret it when you're alone in your old age." Before Kelsey could respond, the doorbell rang. She frowned, not expecting anyone. When she opened the door, her sister Sandy stood there with a suitcase in hand. "Kelsey, surprise," Sandy chirped, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I'm moving in." "What?" Kelsey stared at her sister, dumbfounded. "Why?" Sandy rolled her eyes, as if the answer should have been obvious. "I got divorced. And well, I need a place to stay." Kelsey's heart sank. Her once spacious home was now crowded with people who seemed to have no respect for her space. Worse, Sandy brought with her an air of superiority despite her own failures. In their parents' eyes, Sandy's divorce was a minor inconvenience, while Kelsey's single status was a character flaw. "Well, aren't you going to offer me a room?" Sandy asked, already walking toward the stairs. Kelsey stood frozen in the doorway, watching helplessly as her sister settled into one of the guest rooms. The house no longer felt like hers. As the weeks passed, the tension in the house mounted. Kelsey found herself withdrawing, retreating to her room or her workspace, trying to carve out a semblance of privacy in her own home. But it wasn't enough. The constant criticisms, the veiled insults, it was too much. One day, she made a decision. If her family wasn't going to respect her boundaries, then she would create her own joy. So, she adopted Milo, a tiny black chihuahua with bright, curious eyes. He was a bundle of energy and affection, and for the first time in weeks, Kelsey felt a glimmer of happiness. But her family's reaction was swift and harsh. "You didn't even ask us if you could get a dog," Diane snapped when Kelsey brought Milo home. "Dogs are dirty. They shed. They smell." Sandy, lounging on the couch, wrinkled her nose. "Great. Another thing for you to ignore while you pretend to work all day." Kelsey glared at her sister, her anger rising. "I don't need to ask permission. This is my house. I pay for everything, and I'll make my own decisions." Ron, seated in his usual spot at the table, shook his head. "You're being selfish, Kelsey. So we all have to live here." Kelsey stared at the three of them, feeling the walls closing in. It wasn't just about the dog. It was about the control they wanted to exert over her life, over her choices. "Fine," Kelsey said through gritted teeth. "If you don't like it, you're welcome to leave." Her words hung in the air, met with silence. For a moment, Kelsey thought maybe, just maybe, they would consider her offer. But as usual, they ignored her, brushing off her ultimatum as though she hadn't spoken at all. The final straw came one evening when Milo had an accident. Sandy, who had left her clothes strewn across the floor, was furious when she found them soiled. "This is your fault," Sandy screamed, waving the soiled clothes in Kelsey's face. "You can't even control that stupid dog." Kelsey clenched her fists, her heart pounding in her chest. If you'd picked up your clothes like a normal person, this wouldn't have happened. Sandy's eyes blazed. "I want you and that dog out of this house, now." Kelsey stared at her sister, stunned by the audacity. But before she could respond, her parents chimed in, backing Sandy. "That's right," Ron said. "You've caused enough trouble. Maybe it's time you left." Diane crossed her arms, her face a mask of disapproval. "You're only making things worse, Kelsey. Maybe this isn't the right place for you anymore." The betrayal hit Kelsey like a punch to the gut. This was her house, her life, and yet they were pushing her out as though she were the intruder. Something inside her snapped. Without a word, she turned and walked upstairs, Milo at her heels. She packed her bags, her heart heavy but her mind clear. She'd had enough. Enough of their manipulation, their criticism, their entitlement. By the time she left the house, her family barely even noticed. They were too wrapped up in their own world to care that she was walking away for good. It didn't take long for the panic to set in. Just days after Kelsey's departure, her phone rang. "Kelsey, you have to help us." Sandy's voice was frantic on the other end. "The house, they're saying we have to leave." Kelsey's lips curled into a grim smile. She had anticipated this. Kelsey sat on the edge of her new couch, Milo curled up in her lap, as she listened to Sandy's voice grow more desperate. She had expected this call. When she left, she had immediately contacted her realtor and put the house on the market. It wasn't just her decision to leave, it was her decision to start anew, to reclaim the life that was rightfully hers. Her family had taken her space for granted, and now they were learning the hard way that nothing came for free. "Kelsey, are you listening? We're going to be evicted. They said the house is sold, and we have 30 days to move out." Sandy's voice cracked, panic bubbling to the surface. Kelsey took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision settle comfortably on her shoulders. She had been generous, patient, and far too forgiving for far too long. It was time to put herself first. "I'm listening," Kelsey said, her voice calm, almost detached. "But I don't understand why this is my problem, Sandy. You made it clear I wasn't welcome there anymore. You and Mom and Dad wanted me out, remember?" Sandy sputtered on the other end of the line, clearly not expecting this response. We didn't mean it like that. You can't just sell the house and leave us homeless." Kelsey glanced out the window of her new apartment, feeling the quiet peace of her surroundings wash over her. The small but cozy space was already starting to feel like home, and Milo seemed to love it too. So the little dog yawned contentedly in her lap, unaware of the chaos unfolding on the phone. "Sandy, you and Mom and Dad made your choices. You forced me out of my own house, and now you expect me to fix everything. I'm done. I'm done being the one who always bends over backward to make everyone else comfortable. You wanted the house. Well, now it's sold. You'll have to figure things out." There was a stunned silence on the other end. Then, Kelsey heard her mother's voice in the background, sharp and accusing. "What's she saying? Give me the phone." Kelsey braced herself as Diane's voice came through loud and clear. "Kelsey Ann Tanner, what do you think you're doing? You can't just abandon us like this." "Abandon you?" Kelsey repeated, incredulous. "Mom, you and Dad kicked me out of my own house. You told me to leave because of a dog, for crying out loud. And now you're upset because I sold the house that I own." "This is your family," Diane shot back, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. "You don't just walk away from family." Kelsey felt a surge of anger, but beneath it was something stronger, clarity. For years, she had let her family guilt her into making sacrifices, into believing that their happiness was more important than her own. But now, for the first time, she saw the situation for what it was. "You're right, Mom," Kelsey said softly. "You don't walk away from family. But family doesn't manipulate you. Family doesn't make you feel small and worthless. You've always been so focused on what I'm not, how I'm not married, how I work from home like it's some kind of hobby. But you never stopped to see me for who I am, and I'm done being treated like an inconvenience in my own life." Diane sputtered, clearly caught off guard. "We never said you were worthless." "No, but you implied it every chance you got," Kelsey interrupted. "I don't owe you anything. You made your choices, and now it's time to deal with the consequences." There was a long pause on the other end. Kelsey could hear her father's low murmurs in the background, but she had no interest in what he had to say. Her decision was final. "So what are we supposed to do now?" Diane finally asked, her voice smaller, less commanding. Kelsey felt a pang of sadness, but she pushed it aside. She had spent too much time worrying about them. "I'm sure you'll figure something out, Mom. You always do." With that, she hung up the phone and placed it gently on the coffee table. For a moment, she sat there in the stillness of her new apartment, processing what had just happened. A part of her felt guilty, but a larger part, the part that had been suffocated for years, felt liberated. She had done the right thing. The following weeks passed in relative peace. Kelsey threw herself into her work, landing new clients and expanding her freelance business. Milo quickly became her constant companion, his playful energy a welcome distraction from the lingering thoughts of her family. For the first time in years, Kelsey felt in control of her life. She wasn't constantly looking over her shoulder, waiting for the next criticism or unsolicited piece of advice. She had her own space, her own rules, and she relished every quiet morning and peaceful evening. But as much as she enjoyed her newfound independence, there was still a part of her that ached when she thought about her family. Despite everything they had put her through, they were still her parents and Sandy was still her sister. Cutting them off completely had been necessary for her own survival, but it didn't erase the years of shared history or the complicated emotions tied to them. One afternoon, as Kelsey was sipping coffee by the window, she received a text message. It was from Sandy. "We found a place. It's small, but it'll do. Just wanted to let you know we're okay. S." Kelsey stared at the message for a long moment, a mixture of relief and sadness washing over her. She hadn't expected to hear from her family again, at least not so soon. But there was something comforting in knowing they had found a way to move on, even without her. She typed a brief reply, glad to hear it. She didn't know what else to say. It was a strange feeling, this limbo between estrangement and reconciliation. But for now, it was enough to know that they had found their own path, just as she had found hers. As the months passed, Kelsey continued to build her new life, piece by piece. Her work flourished, and she found joy in the small things: morning walks with Milo, evenings spent reading by the fire, the freedom to live without the constant judgment of her family. But every now and then, she found herself reflecting on the choices that had led her here. She had always been the responsible one, the one who held everything together, even when it wasn't fair. And for a long time, she had believed that her worth was tied to how much she could give to others. It had taken a long time to realize that she didn't owe anyone her happiness. Her family had taken advantage of her kindness, her sense of duty, but in the end, she had reclaimed her life. She had drawn the line, and for once, she had chosen herself. Kelsey knew she had made the right decision, but she also knew that life wasn't black and white. There were shades of gray, and while she was content with her choices, there were still moments of doubt. Had she been too harsh? Could she have handled things differently? But as she looked around her apartment, filled with the warmth and peace she had longed for, she knew that, ultimately, she had done what was necessary. One crisp autumn afternoon, Kelsey was surprised to hear a knock on her door. Milo barked excitedly, darting toward the entrance. Kelsey opened the door to find Sandy standing on the other side, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Sandy?" Kelsey said, her brow furrowed. "What are you doing here?" Sandy shifted her weight from foot to foot, her gaze avoiding Kelsey's. I wanted to talk." Kelsey stepped aside, allowing her sister to enter. Sandy looked around the small apartment, taking in the cozy atmosphere. It was a far cry from the spacious house they had once shared, but there was a warmth to it that couldn't be ignored. "I'm not here to ask for anything," Sandy said quickly, as if sensing Kelsey's wariness. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." Kelsey crossed her arms, unsure of how to respond. Apologies were rare in their family, and hearing one now felt strange. "You don't have to." "No, I do," Sandy interrupted, her voice shaky. "We treated you like garbage. I treated you like garbage." And I see that now. You didn't deserve any of it. Kelsey stared at her sister, taken aback by the raw honesty in her words. Sandy had always been the golden child in their parents' eyes, and Kelsey had never expected her to admit any wrongdoing. I should have stood up for you, Sandy continued, but I was too wrapped up in my own problems to care about yours. And when you left, I realized how much we'd relied on you, how much we'd taken from you without giving anything back. Kelsey swallowed, emotions swirling in her chest. She had never imagined this moment, and now that it was happening, she didn't know how to feel. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Sandy said softly, but I wanted you to know that I see it now, and I'm sorry. Kelsey took a deep breath, her mind racing. Forgiveness wasn't something that came easily, not after everything that had happened. But in that moment, she saw her sister in a new light, a woman who had been broken and humbled by her own mistakes. Thank you for saying that, Kelsey finally said, her voice steady. It means a lot. Sandy nodded, her eyes glassy. I don't expect us to go back to the way things were, but maybe we can start over. Kelsey considered the offer. It wouldn't be easy. There was a lot of pain, a lot of hurt to work through. But maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new, a relationship built on honesty, respect, and boundaries. We'll see, Kelsey said, a small smile tugging at her lips, one step at a time. Sandy returned the smile, and for the first time in years, Kelsey felt a glimmer of hope. As winter approached, Kelsey found herself settling into her new life with a sense of peace she had never known before. Her family was still a part of her world, but the dynamic had shifted. She had made it clear that her boundaries would no longer be crossed, and for the first time, they respected that. Milo remained her loyal companion, his presence a constant source of comfort. The days were quiet, but they were filled with purpose, work that she loved, moments of reflection, and the simple joy of living on her own terms. So one evening, as Kelsey curled up on the couch with a cup of tea and Milo snuggled beside her, she realized just how far she had come. The chaos, the manipulation, the guilt, it was all behind her now. She had taken control of her life, and she wasn't about to give that up. She smiled to herself, feeling a sense of contentment that she had once thought was out of reach. For the first time, she truly believed in her own worth, her own happiness. And that, she knew, was the greatest victory of all. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe, give it a thumbs up, hit the bell, and drop a comment. Your feedback is greatly appreciated.